special guests. The UBC Sauder student team is here, fresh from their recent win at the Pacific Northwest Real Estate Challenge. Before we introduce the team, I'd like to introduce our NAIOP Vancouver President for 2023, Paula Benham-Parker, Vice President of Investments at Concert Properties.
Good morning, everyone. So as Paul mentioned, my name is Paula Benham-Parker, and I'm honored to be this year's NAIOP Vancouver President. NAIOP's pillars are advocacy, networking, and education, and NAIOP is very proud to support higher education in the field of commercial real estate. Our longest-term program of support has been for the UBC Sauder team that competes in the NAIOP competition, helping them compete each year against other Pacific Northwest universities. As a proud UBC Sauder real estate alumni, I'm very happy to see them here again with us today. I would like to call on my old professor, Sir Somerville, to say a few words and introduce the team, which, spoiler alert, they won this year again. So congrats, sir, you're doing something right. Over to you.
We need to talk about this old professor part. You're at least middle-aged. Help me out here, Paula. So, as Paula mentioned, this has been going on for a long time. So we've been participating in the competition for 20 years. So if you think about this partnership that we've had with the Vancouver NAIOP chapter, goes back 20 years. And we've put through this particular competition, which is you guys, many of you have heard this because we do this every year, right? But it's essentially a 2.5-month exercise where they get extremely granular on a development proposal, and they have to produce a professional quality proposal, present it to judges. They work with NAIOP members in mentoring them in design, in finance, in marketing. And so it's a real partnership between us, UBC, the students, and the industry. That would not happen and would not have been possible without the tremendous support from NAIOP Vancouver as an institution. Paula was also on the NAIOP team, and whenever I look at sort of the leadership of NAIOP, not only do I see students, former students of mine, but I also see people who have competed in this program. And I'm just tremendously grateful to NAIOP for this support. 20 years, about 200 students have gone through this. Most of whom are in the industry here, and it's just been a fantastic partnership. And it's also been one that has been successful in terms of education, but also I say in terms of winning, because we've won this thing 11 times and no one else has won it more than 5. So we're particularly proud of that aspect of it. This year it was an unusual challenge because the site was essentially an affordable housing development in Seattle, and in Seattle, affordable housing is done extremely differently than the way it's done here. You have private entities or nonprofit entities competing for different types of funding sources. So it was a tremendous learning experience for the students in terms of having to think of a capital stack that wasn't drawing on traditional uses, and where the capital stack itself, the funders, had requirements on uses. And it was quite a challenge in that sense because there was a tremendous learning curve. But we think that they did a really great job. When you see what they did, it's going to seem really unusual to you guys because it's not the way we do things, certainly in the Lower Mainland, where we do a lot of inclusionary zoning, or things are just in the public sector. A lot of what happens in the U.S. is a lot of private capital in various types of tax incentive programs going in to fund affordable housing. So I think that was, did I use up my minutes now? And I can introduce the students. I would love to introduce the students, except for the following problem. One has COVID. 3 of them texted me this morning that they're not feeling well. Now, not feeling well with a student is always kind of a question. Are they not feeling well, or did they behave the night before in such a way that they don't feel well this morning? So as a result of that, we've got only 2 of the 6 students, which, before you guys think poorly of them, just remember when you were 21 your ability to get to a 7:30 or 8 a.m. breakfast event, let alone the 8:30 classes. And those of you who were my students, I remember how you guys were. So make sure you cut them a little slack here. So I want to invite up at least Senna Gao and Jeffrey Chung to come up here, get their certificates. And you just hold them up, get a picture. There we go.
Coming for the photo. Thank you, sir. So thank you, sir, and congratulations again to our UBC solder team, who again brought home the victory trophy. At this time, I would like to acknowledge this morning's feature sponsors. Our sponsors make much of our work possible, and we immensely appreciate your support and participation with NAIOP. Special thanks to this morning's featured sponsors. At the platinum level, you have Anthem Properties, Avis & Young, Cushman & Wakefield, Cadillac Fairview, Ani Group, and Westbuild. At the gold level, Concord Pacific, Hungerford Properties, Orion Construction, Turner Construction. At the patron level, CDC Construction Limited, Clark Wilson LLP, Downtown Surrey Business Improvement Association, Lee and Associates, Morgard, and Wales McClellan Construction. I wanted to provide you, before we commence this morning's breakfast, a few updates from NAIOP. This week, you may have seen our announcement and the amendment that the prohibition on the purchase of residential property by non-Canadian acts was announced by the federal government. As you may have seen in our LinkedIn post and email communication, the 4 Canadian chapters sent a letter together requesting a carve-out for our industry and our activities. This is a new initiative where we've started a national task force. While most of our advocacy occurs at the municipal level, where a lot of our work is done, we are increasingly impacted by other levels of government, and most notably the federal government in recent years. For this reason, the Canadian chapters have convened this task force to determine our best strategy for combined advocacy at the federal level. This request for an amendment to the Act was our first joint effort, and we were thrilled to see that there were changes noted pretty much a week or two after our letters were received at the federal level. So big thanks to our other Canadian chapters for all that collaboration. Wanted to also highlight 2 of our upcoming activities. At the DL level, we have an event coming up. There's going to be indoor golf at 1 Under on April 19th, so look for that email. Also, next week on Tuesday, April 4th, we will be hosting our spring cocktail event, and that is before the Vancouver Real Estate Forum, so we hope to see you there. Right now, we have over 200 registrants, so I'm hoping to see many of your faces there next Tuesday between 3 and 6 p.m. And tickets are available for both of these events through the NAIOP Vancouver website. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce this morning's moderator, Madeleine Nicholls. Madeleine will be moderating our retail panel this morning. She is the Senior Managing Director of the Vancouver Brokerage and National Retail Brokerage Lead for Canada at Colliers. With over 20 years of experience in commercial real estate, Madeleine has established herself in the industry as an expert and a true leader. Madeleine has expertise at all levels of new business development, from strategic planning and acquisitions to prospecting, pitching, negotiating offers and leases, and build-out of space. She has exceptional tenant relationship management and knowledge in the redevelopment of properties to maximize value. Madeleine is a champion and ally of Colliers' Diversity and Inclusion Program, volunteering her time as the co-chair for the Colliers Women's Network. She actively volunteers her time to speak to student groups, industry, and the media. And I will call up Madeleine. Thank you so much for volunteering your time this morning to be our moderator.
Well, thank you so much, Paula. And I must shorten that bio. Well, I'd love to call up Brodie, Katie, and Shane, and I'll introduce our panelists. Okay, terrific. Well, it's great to see so many old friends and some new faces as well. So first of all, Katie Bertram. Katie is the leasing manager for H&M, and she's responsible for the growth of the Canadian stores for H&M, COS, and Home, in addition to the market entry strategy for And Other Stories and Arquette. Very excited to hear they're coming. Katie has over 15 years of experience and started her career with Shape, where she worked on over 3 million square feet of retail and office properties. Katie was instrumental in the merchandising, design and development and pre-leasing of High Street in Abbotsford and the amazing Brentwood in Burnaby. Following Shape, Katie transitioned to the tenant side of the business, where she worked for Lululemon, managing the Canadian portfolio and the development of store expansion. She also has a very impressive 4-year career on the Canadian Alpine ski team. Shane Epp is responsible for overseeing the leasing at BGO and is an enclosed mall and mixed-use asset expert. He has 3.2 million square feet and has a team of 4 experienced leasing professionals. He currently handles 7 enclosed malls from St. Vital in Winnipeg to Hillside Centre in Victoria. Shane joined BentallGreenOak as VP of Leasing in 2018 after 24 years as a real estate broker in Vancouver with several firms, including CBRE, and I had the pleasure of working with Shane there. His experience in retail is from tenant representation to site assembly and acquisition, site plan development, anchor tenant pre-leasing, asset repositioning, project marketing, ongoing CRU leasing, and asset disposition. And Brodie is an EVP at JLL, where he's responsible for retail leasing and investment sales across Western Canada. Brodie's career in real estate spans more than 15 years, and he joined JLL in 2018 after 8 years at Northwest Atlantic. Brodie has advised on numerous investment transactions and has leased over 3 million square feet of retail across Western Canada. Brodie's clientele includes both landlords and tenants, and he's focused his time most recently on tenant representation. Brodie currently represents several premier retail brands, including TJX, PetSmart, Staples, and McDonald's. All right, so let's get into it. This is a retail market update. So a few facts to set the stage, and then we'll get into it. So we've had a lot of announcements in the past couple of weeks. No shortage of news articles poo-pooing retail. Industrial and retail are now joined at the hip. Zellers is in. Bed Bath & Beyond and Nordstrom are out. Do you know it's 10% off at Nordstrom this week? It's 5% last week. Traditional retail was focused on a large display at the front, very small back of house. That's completely turned on its head. It's a 2080 model now. As for retail, at first glance, you may assume, based on the struggling brands and perhaps the media, that retail's struggling. But in fact, it is at an all-time high. Canadian retail sales are currently at $735 billion. That's 19% higher than they were in 2019. Okay, so 19% higher. So some of that is inflation, of course, but not all of it. Colliers manages 10 million square feet of retail across the country. And when we surveyed our retail tenants, 57% of them said that they're going to keep the same amount of square footage, 15% said they want more, and only 9% of them said that they want less. The national retail vacancy has decreased by 1%, so we're going to end up at around 7% at the end of this year. And when we look at e-commerce, which we'll touch on, StatsCan only started following e-commerce in 2016, and it peaked at 11%. Okay, so not very much. That was the peak, 11%, and that was between March and May of 2020, and we all know why that was. So right now, it's at 6%, and I want you to keep in mind that 6% because it's a real strong indicator of where bricks and mortar is going to be going. And what's happening here in Vancouver? Well, the urban vacancy has increased from 2.5% mid last year to 4% now. And by contrast, the suburban vacancy has decreased by 2.5% to 1%. Retail is the canary of our industry, and people vote with their feet. So against that backdrop, let's get into it. So, Brodie, the first question to you. You work very closely with TJX, Winners, Marshalls, HomeSense, and the big box world just got shook with recent announcements from Bed Bath & Beyond and Nordstrom. So who is going to fill these sites?
Well, thanks, Madeleine. It's really interesting. Over the last few weeks here, we've seen roughly 3 million square feet that's going to be coming back to the market between the Bed Bath & Beyonds at just under 2 million and the Nordstrom at well over 1 million feet across the country. And representing a number of clients, I've got a number of clients as well as our firm and other ones across the country that are definitely interested in taking this space. And I guess we were, as a company and industry, kind of watching this to see how this would happen. So as of last Friday, we're accepting bids on the Bed Bath & Beyond locations, and 51 of the 65 have been picked up. And so we'll find out next week what happens with those, but there's been offers on 51 of those. So that means 2 million square feet across the country, 80% of it's been picked up in roughly a few days. So it just shows the resilience of the market. The last couple of years, there's been very limited supply built, with construction costs and interest rates, and it kind of it speaks to the robustness of the retail market in that there's with great quality real estate, there's still strong demand across the market. So I think stay tuned to next week, and you'll see a number of retailers. I think potentially some new entrants that we haven't seen, as well as some existing retailers expanding their networks across the country and some of this vacancy.
Who are those new retailers, Brodie? What can you say? Come on.
I don't know, Shane. You'll have to wait and see.
Maybe by the end of the hour, we'll have some announcements. So, Katie, with your experience at H&M and prior with Lululemon, what is the importance of the omni-channel experience for retail?
I think these days it's a necessity and almost the expectation that there is an omni-channel retail strategy for the majority of retail brands. It's really, people start their customer journey shopping online, so people need as many physical touch points as well as omni-channel experiences in order to really resonate with the brand. I think it's the best way to acquire, to engage, and to actually retain customers. Especially this day and age, most of it starts online and finishes either in store or back to the online channel.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Shane, a question for you. So you've got these enclosed malls and a variety of them. How are the tenants performing? And are there any categories that are particularly struggling or excelling?
Well, I guess in general, what I would say is obviously enclosed malls got stung by COVID, probably a lot worse than street front or suburban retail. And we're seeing them bounce back kind of in the same order geographically that COVID kind of got dealt with. So our centers in the west are leading, and as you go east, they're still catching up. As far as tenants that are doing well, actually, I'll back up. So even though we just got through COVID, in our enclosed mall portfolio, we're at 97+% occupancy right now. Traffic is actually back up at least to 2019. In some malls in the West, it's exceeding 2019. We kind of use 2019 as the benchmark pre-COVID. In the East, it hasn't quite caught up yet, but sales are actually over 2019. So even in markets where the traffic hasn't caught up yet, I think the conversion rate of retailers, which started in COVID, has increased and is staying up. Basically, if you're going to the mall, you're going to the mall to buy something, not to just go look at 20 stores. And what the retailers that are doing well, jewelry, believe it or not, in our portfolio has done well. Electronics, food, whether it's food court or restaurants are blowing the doors off. Some ones that have struggled, obviously, beauty services through COVID was a challenge, both with closures, partial closures, social distancing. They're still taking some time to bounce back. The other part of that is obviously people weren't going out. They weren't doing their hair. They weren't doing their makeup or their nails. Same thing even on women's wear. Loungewear and pajamas did great through COVID. Now it's actually turning the corner and you need workwear. That's doing well. Our menswear stores are actually through the roof right now. Now, obviously, that's a lot of pent-up demand. God, I probably haven't worn a collared shirt in 3 years. So, that has bounced back. Whether it'll continue through the rest of the year, it'll probably, tail off a little bit. But those are the ones that are actually doing well right now.
That's great to hear. And for the UBC students, did you hear that? The collared shirts are back. So, Brodie, PetSmart Staples have head offices in Canada, and they've been successful for over 20 years. And why is that? Why are some surviving and excelling and others are not?
Well, I think, those two are an example as well. There's many other U.S. retailers, named Costco, Home Depot, a number of other ones, obviously TJX. And there's a number of these U.S. retailers that are very successful in Canada. And I think the big reason for it is they've come up here, they've set up head offices, they have thousands of employees. Predominantly those offices have been in Ontario and Toronto, the region, but they understand the Canadian customer, and I think that's been the big differentiating factor between some of the more recent ones such as Target and I guess the more recent ones Bed Bath & Beyond. Some of these they just not understanding the Canadian customer and realizing the Canadian customer is very different than the U.S. customer. We look very similar, we do act very similar, but when it comes down to the actual purchasing and how we're dispersed geographically, it's very different than the U.S. And that I think has been the big difference maker for some of the companies that have been more successful. You can't operate remotely in Canada, and I think that's just been proven here again with what's happened in the recent news.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Katie, how important is bricks and mortar really? I mean, it's the majority of the sales, but let's get into that a little more.
I think it's more important now than it has been ever before. And I think COVID really brought this to the forefront. People got used to shopping in a certain way for 2 years, basically behind a screen, shopping online, not having to physically go out to a store, or if they did, it was, curbside pickup or other things like that. So I think it's more, and brands need more of a compelling reason to get people back in the doors. So whether that's experiential, whether that's, looking at other markets to potentially penetrate. So there was a lot of shift into the suburban market during COVID, just because it was, easier, closer to home. So looking at other ways to get closer to their customer. And you want to be able to provide a compelling reason to have these people come into your store. So, having loyalty programs, buy online, pick up in store, click and collect, making it as convenient as possible for the customer. And the physical store, I think people still really do like going in, touching the items. Maybe they may not make the purchase in there, but they want to actually see, and you can put your best foot forward that way. And I think like H&M, I can speak to that. We're starting to look at the P&L from an omni perspective and not just from a single store in isolation. So we can see how the store can drive the online platform and vice versa. So it's not just, it's having a more holistic approach to the physical setting.
And I'm hearing that consumers are more discerning and kind of picky than ever before. So in terms of the experience, are there any adjustments you've had to make to get people through the door and keep them in the door?
I think it's product, breadth of product. It's making sure that the product that we're offering is as local and relevant as possible. So making sure that our teams are constantly analyzing data, whether it's real time or historical, to make sure that what is being brought onto the floor is actually what's going to sell and resonate with customers. I think, being able to track customer journeys when they're in the store, there's a lot of things. I don't think it's now just about stepping foot into a store and buying something, because a good store has a lasting impression, and a bad store just as equally. So it's making sure our stores are really healthy and relevant, and they're not necessarily the 20,000 square foot stores that used to be operating. Now we're looking at more of a compact setting and reaching more customers, but still understanding that physical is key.
And did you pay attention? She said we're being tracked while we're in the store, so those
Always.
apps are alive and well. So Shane, I'd love to hear a bit more about your portfolio. Describe a little bit the makeup. What are some of the malls you're responsible for? And how desirable is retail from an ownership point of view?
Well, first I'll just start with a little bit about BGO. Bentall, I know that name resonates a lot in BC, but what a lot of people don't seem to know, because I get calls from people back east on Bentall Centre all the time, is that Bentall doesn't actually own anything. We're just a real estate services platform. And we have an investment management arm that raises funds from institutional investors, wealthy clients, pension funds. Those are our core clients, but that makes up roughly half of my portfolio. The other half is just true third-party management and leasing clients like Investors Group or IMCO, BOZA even. My portfolio goes all the way from Driftwood Mall in Courtenay, which is probably our smallest asset, to St. Vital Centre in Winnipeg, which is a almost 1 million square foot super regional. And we kind of run the gamut, everything in between. You already alluded to, it's about 3.3 million square feet. And it does give us a touch point with tons of retailers, but certainly I've got retailers in St. Vital that I'm not going to be able to attract to a market like Courtenay necessarily. Excuse me. And sorry, what was the question again?
Well, I love where you were going with all of that. Perhaps a little follow-on question. So with that breadth of ownership across Western Canada, you're doing hundreds of deals between renewals and new deals. What are the mechanics of those deals now? How are they structured, and what's changed?
I remembered what the first part was, which was how demand is in retail. Well, I could say from an institutional perspective, I don't think they're lining up to buy enclosed malls anymore, but needs-based retail, food, drugstore anchored, major markets is still severely in demand. Speaking of deal structure, so in the enclosed mall world over the last year, we did, in my portfolio, roughly 140 deals. Call it 100 renewals, 40 new deals. Of those 40, I would say the vast majority were all percentage of sales deals. Over the past few years, that's kind of been the new reality in the enclosed mall world. The key is trying to, A, not invest a ton of capital in those deals. It's usually repurposing second-generation space, for example, that was already a fashion retailer, put another one in. And then number two, just getting creative on how you structure the percentage of sales, whether it's minimum thresholds of additional rent or another number, various percentages as they hit certain sales thresholds. And then we've gotten really creative where when you hit certain thresholds, it converts to real minimum rent. And having a number of these retailers in our centers, we can point to, they've got 6 locations, they average about $500 a foot across the portfolio. As long as they hit average $500 a foot here, at this price point, it's going to convert into this net rent, and the landlord actually gets a decent income with minimal risk, and it's easier to entice the tenant to get in. At the end of the day, in the enclosed mall world, you need occupancy first, because if you get a ton of vacancy, you create a black hole that is very hard to come back from. Once you have occupancy, then you can generate the traffic. Once the traffic is there, hopefully it's up to your retailers to convert that into sales. And once the sales are there, then you can convert that into real rent. But you need all 4 of those to to come together, and it takes some time. It's not instantaneous. But the key is getting occupancy, and for the past few years, that's been doing percentage of sales deals.
Sounds like you've been doing great, and well done on those creative deals. So you talked a little bit about restaurants and F&B being in high demand. And as we know, those are the most expensive deals to do from a landlord perspective. So how are you bridging the gap on that? And, what kind of money do you have to spend now?
Well, the capital involved is significant, as you've alluded to, but I think, at least in our portfolio, and I think many other landlords are seeing the same thing, you need that offering in the mall. You want to be able to have people sit, stay, dine, drink, and if that means it's, I don't want to call it a loss leader, but I'm not getting the same kind of rents out of restaurants that I can get out of fashion in my main fashion run. It's still just a use that we need, and it drives traffic. And so we're kind of biting the bullet to do those deals, as long as it's the right operator. And we believe in the concept, and we do our market research on how well they're going to do, how well they do in the market, and it's a use worth doing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, because I think in some cases those high-draw restaurants are really the new anchors. So, Katie, a question for you. You've got a global portfolio, and, the rage is all these big puffy coats rated to -40. But of course, in LA, they don't need that in the stores. So how do retailers get local input on merchandising? Tell us a bit about that.
So we have a full commercial team who deals with strictly the merchandising of the store. So what they do is they take real-time and, again, historical data. They pull it from the loyalty programs. They pull it from the receipts, social media, what's selling in store and online. And they basically come together and compile a mix. A lot of stuff, because it's ordered so far in advance, you really have to do a good job of predicting that and making sure what's showing up in your stores is actually going to sell. So I would say, that's one of the biggest parts. Is there was an issue with some of the supply chain, getting winter coats in Mexico City, which, doesn't in the summertime, which doesn't really resonate with the customer and is not going to move. So it's paying attention to it and trying to predict as much as possible, because if we're not putting the right product in the stores, then we're not providing the best customer experience. We're alienating the customer. They'll probably shop somewhere else, and then in turn, if we're doing a good job, it'll drive sales. So it is really important. It's an ever-evolving process.
Yes, and a little bit of a follow-up question on that. So how long does it take from fashions on the runway to hit the available fashions in an H&M?
I was actually reading about this the other day. There's like 52 micro seasons, which in fast fashion. So you're getting something every week, which is a lot. Whereas I think the traditional model is more like 8 to 12. So it's hard to always constantly predict what's going to be happening and what the trends are. And we typically follow what has been seen on a runway to a certain extent. But there's a lot of prediction and trying to estimate these items as they come off, and, ending up sometimes being a lot of inventory because we can't sell them as quickly as possible.
So, Brodie, I want to come back to you and your amazing roster of resale clients. So when you're advising your clients on real estate, what are you recommending, and how has this changed in the last 5 years?
Well, Madeleine, I think, so similar to what you've said about, suburban, urban, we've seen more clients wanting to be more suburban. As I said, he's getting closer to the customer, and the store sales have shown that. Like, the suburban stores have rebounded faster and are now doing better. A lot of those secondary markets that were, call it a little bit sleepier 5 to 10 years ago, Kelowna, Victoria, Nanaimo, the Okanagan Valley, all through there, those markets are all rocking. Like, they are just outperforming from every extent, and the retailers are all seeing that. So, You've seen, a lot of new stores being added in those markets. I think the big thing that you can look at right now from the retailers, you can tell really quickly which stores are doing really well and which stores are, doing okay by, the look and feel of the store. Does it have new signage? Does it have, have the latest products? Does it have the latest fixtures in there? And, generally they're going to reinvest in those stores which are doing that. So you can see that pretty quickly. Like if you go to the suburban markets today, those stores all look really new and fresh, and they're doing really well. And then you talked about going back to, what's happened with omni-channel and, in terms of last mile and, getting everything put together. Well, the retailers are now also starting to figure out that you have to ship from store to make economic sense of it. And so you're seeing more and more of that, where you're seeing the back house a little bit bigger, and, that's really helping to solve some of their problems. While some are, decreasing in size, some are going the other direction. And they're realizing that, having multiple distribution points, especially in these smaller markets, makes things easier from getting to the customer and, managing returns. The returns is the big, I'm sure Katie can say, returns is probably the biggest challenge for, for retailers. There's actually been, we got 3 or 4 different companies that have come up. There's this treasure hunt, these crazy bins. I don't know if you've heard of these. There's a bunch of these companies that are showing up across Western Canada now. Literally, they buy a return product and they sell it back out the door. They buy returns from Amazon or from Walmart or wherever it is, and they just blow it back out. And so, that's a real issue for retailers because, it's hitting their margins. So, I think what's really changed is the retailers are getting smarter. They're trying to, reinvest in the stores and really focus on, where's the right place for them to be to hit the customer and get the most bang for their buck.
I will say to Brodie's point, it is true because retail changes so quickly and we're always having to be at the forefront of all the change. Whereas on the landlord side, I think it moves at a bit of a slower pace. So when we're going back and asking to revise our lease clauses, it's a bit more difficult, but it's something that's necessary because we can't have these things in place if we can't get the landlord on side.
So, Brodie, we've been talking about the last mile. You mentioned that it's the most expensive portion. And now we've got some of this big box stuff that's coming available, all in a hurry, and some of it, in fact, all of it, incredibly well located. So if we look at some of the examples we know here, but I'm thinking the Nordstrom at Sherway Gardens in Toronto, that is so well located to a massive population. Do you think there's a possibility it could change to be some kind of warehouse or fulfillment center for retail?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think it would be challenging for the mall to have that happen. But could there be some could it be some use that allows for distribution of a certain amount of it potentially? But given you're talking about Sherway in particular, I don't know if everyone in the audience knows Sherway, but it's a top probably 10 mall in the country. So use and experience is very important there. But if you look south of the border in the U.S., you have seen some of these. There has been some malls down in the U.S. that have converted to more of those type of uses. But I mean, I think that really has to do with the fact that they're overbuilt, and the malls that are doing that are really low performing malls, which we don't actually have any of those in Canada. So I don't think that one's going to go. I don't see the Nordstrom stores going that direction, but there's definitely a need for more last mile delivery.
Perfect. And for those in the audience, we are not over-retailed here in Canada, as Brodie alluded to. So in the US, they have 22 square feet per capita, and we have 16 here, just as a metric if you want to remember that. Okay, so Shane, everything's gotten a lot more competitive. So how are you marketing your centres now? What are some of the efforts to attract new tenants? And are you doing anything differently now?
Well, I would say probably the biggest thing is just the depth of research that we do, not just to understand the trade area or the market, but our actual customers. Back in the day, we would draw a 5-kilometer circle around a site and say, here's our population, here's our household income. To Katie's point about tracking, we can now, at all of our centers, actually track via cell phone data everybody that comes into the mall. I know where they live. I know what they spend on everything. And I can define my trade area basically exactly because I know exactly where they live. And within that trade area, I can now determine the types of retailers they like to shop at, the types of restaurants they eat at, and then I can use that to analyze my center and go, this is who I'm hitting, this is who I'm missing, here's who we need to go after, and let's tailor our marketing plan accordingly. And that's probably the biggest change that I've seen, and it's actually incredible with the research and data we have right now. It really resonates with a lot of retailers that you've done your homework.
The same thing. Like some of the information is it's mind-boggling how good the information is. Right, you can tell where people are coming from, so you can see if they're coming to the mall on their journey to work, to home, on the weekend, where they're going. You can pinpoint which stores in the mall they're actually going to. So some of our clients,
how many times a month they're visiting.
Yeah.
The data is incredible, and it's using that data to help market your center to the right retailers and restaurants.
So, Professor Somerville, you'll appreciate this. This is an industry that by and large has been run off Excel sheets. And isn't it refreshing to hear that there's some science that's catching up now, finally? So, Katie, we did touch on this a little bit, but how are retailers connecting with customers now that might be different from the past? Like, where are we heading now with the apps and so forth?
I mean, what I see most is strategic partnerships, which has been a big thing. I know for us personally, it's costs. So we actually just started wholesaling out of Nordstrom in the US, which expands our product awareness, which is something we didn't have previously. It's more of an unknown brand that's coming from Stockholm. So I think the more people we can get it in front of, the better. I think Kohl's did another pretty interesting thing. They partnered up, and I think they just expanded to 250 Sephora stores that will operate in that department store, which is really great. And again, it's probably people that typically wouldn't shop at a Sephora in a Kohl's, but now they're bringing those and having some cross-shopping. I think what has also been really good is pop-ups. When I was at Lululemon, we would go in and test markets where we thought our customer was there. We'd do some analysis with all the data we were getting from our existing customer base, and we'd drop in a pop-up and operate there for a couple years. And then H&M is also looking at doing some of the same stuff too on a more experiential basis, not maybe so much to understand if their customers there, but more just to bring brand awareness. I think airport kiosks are becoming more and more, or just whether it's vending machines or actual sort of shop-in-shops, just getting visibility again to the brand, and you're attracting an audience that you typically wouldn't see. And then just everything that has to do with online. So whether you're selling on Amazon, you're selling on Tmall, WeChat, the more exposure you can get, the better. And I think a lot of brands typically wouldn't have looked at this in the past and are now trying to reach in every channel they possibly can.
Terrific. And you mentioned pop-ups. That's a perfect segue for you, Shane. What's the role of specialty leasing now?
Well, I'd say it's definitely grown exponentially, especially through COVID. Traditionally, we would have left short-term specialty leasing to the property manager on site to deal with. The biggest enclosed mall groups like Cadillac Fairview or Ivanhoe probably had that for years, but we only recently invested probably 2 to 3 years ago. We now have 3 specialty leasing people across the country that is their full-time job, is getting out in the market, reaching local retailers, trying to get them to open pop-ups, trying to cultivate. It also used to be, okay, sure, we'll let a local retailer in at a reduced rent, but let's stick them in the space that we haven't been able to lease for 3 years, that L shape with no frontage buried by Hudson's Bay in a corner. Now it's actually taking an approach going, do we want them to succeed? Like, don't stick them in a hole where it's not going to work. give them an actual opportunity in the main run if you think the concept's going to work. Give them actually some capital so they can have decent signage and a real opportunity. And we're actually creating in certain centers incubator space in a main run that we're going to reserve and keep to just cultivate local tenants going forward. And we've had a lot of good success actually with local tenants that have extended and are now real tenants paying real rents, and it's kind of a win-win for both.
Fantastic. So, Katie, I'm going to come back to you, but before that, Brodie, I've got a question for you. It wasn't one that we thought about beforehand, but you touched on the crazy bins. So, Winners, HomeSense, Marshalls, they're already selling product at a bit of a discount. So can you tell us a little bit about the life cycle of that clothing and perhaps what happens to it after it's been in the store for a while?
Well, so I guess specifically to to Winners Home, Winners Homes and Marshalls brands, like they're an off-price retailer, so they're, moving, that product is coming, it's being purchased for the seasons, they're moving it out the door. And they're really focused on moving the product. So it's about price driving it. And again, they've got great analyst teams that know what's coming down, what are the trends, and how to move the product fast. And that I think is the big differentiator between a successful retailer and non-successful retailers, knowing what's going to sell, right? So you're seeing more of that. And are you more going down the line of
That was for me.
of where are things going with
Sustainability
and all that? You're seeing more and more of the secondhand, resale type things. You probably noticed, Value Village opened up on South Granville, which I guess no one probably would have suspected that, but they're doing phenomenal business there. And you're seeing more and more of that, reuse of clothing, because everyone knows that, clothing is it's a big contributor to, the efforts against sustainability, I guess, really the way you look at it. So, it's a challenge, and I think the whole industry is realizing that, from the fashion side. So I think you'll see more and more of this reuse. I mean, IKEA is now letting you bring back your old furniture, and they'll give you credit in the store to buy stuff. So it's, I think that is something we're seeing more and more of, and I think that will continue.
I don't know if you saw this article. So the H&M on Bloor Street is being replaced by Fabricland. And I thought, wow, if we got to the point that we're actually going to be making our clothes again. So really interesting. I mean, we're touching and kind of skirting around sustainability. It is a big thing for every single company, all the companies that we work for. ESG is a big component now. So Katie, can you tell us a little bit more about this as it pertains to H&M?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these fashion companies have targets on their back from an environmental impact standpoint. For us, we have a goal of reducing our carbon footprint by half by 2030 and doubling our sales. So it's a very lofty goal, but we in Canada in 2021 launched Rewear, which is repurposing your fashion, and we launched with in partnership with ThreadUp, which is an online consignment platform. And it's just basically to extend the life of clothing, and it can be H&M's and it can be anything else from your closet. So you basically take a photo of it, upload onto the site, and you can either purchase or sell. We're also looking at sustainability from our store building process. So we're looking at how we can reuse and repurpose existing fixtures and extend the life cycle of those. We're looking at locally based fixture vendors, which allows us to control the process better. We're not ordering from China. We are looking at ways also to use raw resources from the market and not having to bring them from either the US or overseas. And then it also, in turn, reduces our carbon footprint when we're shipping these items. So rather than coming from Asia, they're coming from our backyard. So that's been a really big push, and we're working on that with Global to try and get everybody on board and make sure we can do it in a timely and efficient manner. Plus, we also get the stores open quicker because we're not at the mercy of shipping.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to be opening up to Q&A, but before we do, there's one last question, which is probably the one that we all want answered, and I'm going to call on Brodie for this one. We're going to put you in the hot seat. So I'm sure we've all been asked, what is going to happen to the Nordstrom space downtown? So Brodie, please, take it away.
Well, I guess that is $1 million question right now. I mean, obviously as a customer, pretty sad to see it go away. But I think it will create opportunities. I think it's safe to say there's probably not too many 230,000 square foot retailers that are going to take that space. So it likely will get split up. I don't know. There's a bunch of office leasing people here. I don't know if there's going to be much demand from the office market. So that space can get split up into a few different opportunities. There's still a number of retailers that want to be downtown. So I think you'll see it get split up into a few different spaces. Perhaps multiple levels, some things like that. So I think it's sad to see it go, but I guess always creating opportunity for others. So. That's my take. I think it'll get split up into some.
Well, I like it. Pacific Centre's just not big enough, is it? We could do with a bit more CRU. Okay, so let's open up to any Q&A that you might have. And there's a couple of mics around, or if you feel you've got a good voice this morning, you can certainly just stand up and holler.
All right, thanks then.
Okay, any questions? Okay, we have one here.
Where are retail rents going? Where are retail rents
Down.
going? Well, I guess it depends where you ask. Urban, suburban, malls, but for example, in our strip centers, I think I mentioned we're about 97% occupied in the malls. Our strip centers are over 99% leased. We have 30 centers that are 100% leased where we have no vacancy at all, which has only got to drive rents up. I mean, it's just a question of supply and demand. Now, at a certain point, even if you've got 10 retailers lined up for a space, there's going to be a threshold that, taxes going up, op costs going up, how much can you afford to pay? But I think in general, our strip center rents are going to be going up significantly. Urban rents, I think, this is just my personal opinion, depending on the use and the space, until our office market comes back to 100%, there's got to be somewhere going this way. If you're in a food court downtown and you're only getting 60% of the traffic that you used to get, you cannot pay the same rent. It's just logical. But if you're out on a street front, somebody buying shoes, whether you're in the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week, I'm still going to go to that shoe store and buy my shoes. They're probably not going to see the same kind of downward pressure, but in general, I would say urban is probably going down somewhat. Suburban is definitely going up. And the malls, we've been lucky enough because I think we're going to start to see the fruition of increasing our occupancy and our traffic. Our sales are going up, and we've already started converting a number of tenants that were on percentage of sales into real net rent deals. And I think that's going to continue through the rest of the year.
I think I would agree with Shane. I think there's a little bit of upward. There's definitely some upward movement in the rents going forward here. I think just from a demand standpoint, it's all about supply and demand. So,
well, let's be honest. They're not going to create any more suburban. Like you're never going to see another traditional format strip center, even power center built in the Lower Mainland with 5 stalls per 1,000 of parking. There's no way you can pay $3-4 million plus an acre with building costs and make sense of that. And regardless of what the planners or anybody else says, shoppers like surface parking, traditional format. If you open a brand new grocery store with structured parking and their competitor is across the street with a massive surface parking pool, the guy with the surface parking pool is going to eat their lunch, like 99 times out of 100. And unfortunately, planners are trying to direct how people like to shop. People don't really care what the planners say. They shop the way they like to shop, and it's not going down escalators and elevators and through 3 levels of structured parking, at least not in the burbs. Downtown, it's a bit of a different animal, right? We're used to it. But until that changes out in the burbs, it's going to put more and more demand on the traditional format strip centers. There's B and C class centers out there now that are 100% leased, simply because there's no other alternative, and retailers would rather be in that format.
I guess, and to that point, Shane, there's 6 million square feet of new retail that's coming in the suburbs over the next 5 years, and 75% of that is already pre-leased. So that just reinforces exactly what you said there. Okay, any more questions? There must be some. Hey, Jacqueline.
Well, I know, for example, we just did a new Save on Foods out in Coquitlam in a 75,000-foot box. 20,000 square feet of that you would not see or know is their back-of-house last-mile delivery that they're actually using for that in the Tri-Cities. So, yeah, I think you're going to see more and more retailers. And let's be honest, big box rents haven't really moved in how long?
Well, they're starting to creep up, but it's...
But I mean, if you're getting $22 out of industrial space now,
that's
the retailer
problem.
was paying $16 or $18, like, why am I going to get more industrial space? I'll convert my retail for sure.
That's what you're seeing, like the industrial and retail rents are converging, specifically in the more inner city markets, and I think that's leading more to the retailers saying, hey, we've got to figure out how to use our stores as a bit of a distribution, and hey, that 1 million square feet, am I going to do it out in the valley for $20 a foot, or am I going to go to Calgary and do it for $9 a foot, and then just have my store be the last mile and do that? So we're seeing this live. Like, the retailers are trying to figure it out because, paying $20+ a foot for industrial space is it's very challenging for them.
Yeah, and we're trying to look at, again, to Brodie's point, is reconfiguring that space. So if we've got stores that are too large and there's within a close proximity to a bunch of other stores, then maybe we can look at using those as sort of back of house shipping facilities. And then we're also looking at, we've got a big new distribution center in Ajax that we're just finishing up building, and maybe we look at putting in smaller distribution centers just due to the size of the country, so it becomes a bit easier to ship things from east to west, and maybe you can look at compiling the east region and then the west region and servicing those either from a distribution center or a physical store.
Yes, please go ahead.
Can you talk to us about retail specifically in downtown Vancouver as it relates to certain things and that have happened recently as for safety and stuff? Do you think people are going to stop coming downtown to shop and dine, or this is to all of you?
I would say no. I know that was a bit of an isolated incident, and I hope it doesn't creep into more things. I think in Canada, we're pretty lucky in comparison to other countries, especially our neighbors south of the border. But I think people will continue to come down if we give them compelling reasons to. Maybe there's more presence from security, whether it's in store or on the streets. But I think, the cities have to do a better job, and I think pushing some of these communities and landlords to, especially on streets like Robson, to occupy space with good brands and brands that aren't going to attract, the 20 different cannabis stores or like your 50th tourist shop. I think those are things that it would be nice if the business districts would mandate that a bit more.
I think there definitely needs to be more of a presence downtown from a policing standpoint, and our new mayor has suggested they're going to do that, so let's hope it happens. Yeah, that incident is so tragic, and it hits very close to home, so it's terrible, and we're seeing it, whether it's vandalism, I have a client who has space on Alberni Street, which is supposed to be the luxury street. They have spent $250,000 in the last 24 months on broken glass.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of that, right? And, they're paying the highest property taxes in the city. Robson Street and Alberni Street pay the highest property tax in the city, yet they're not getting the support. So it's, I think that's part of the problem. We definitely, I think you are going to need more of that to keep people coming downtown. I think, unfortunately, if there's any more incidents like that, I think it's, people are getting concerned, even, you see, on some of the streets where there's a little less retail, that's where you're finding more challenges, right?
Yeah, and it's not unique to Vancouver, right? We're seeing that kind of across the board. In fact, Vancouver's probably a bit luckier because we have such a dense downtown. We already have 120,000 plus people living on the peninsula. If you're in Calgary, Edmonton, or Winnipeg, where that population density isn't there, and now you've got nobody coming to the office, it can be like a ghost town. Like, I was in downtown Winnipeg a few months ago, and I saw more security than actual people. It was scary.
And I think just too, the amount companies pay in loss prevention ends up being a lot. So they'll start to have to weigh their options as to whether it's even realistic for them to be downtown in a certain type of format. Maybe they do enclosed mall and nothing street facing, just so they have a bit more protection.
Okay, other questions? Jeff, was that a hand up? No? Okay, any others? Okay, Paula.
Well, thanks to groups like Katie's, yeah, they're definitely going up. Retailers certainly have capital constraints, or at least they're going to tell you they do.
We do.
And what used to be a $50 TI is now a $75 TI, or what used to be $75 is now $100. Everybody's got constraints on capital. Interest rates are higher. Money costs more. Inducements are definitely going up. It's kind of the price of doing business, at least in the enclosed mall world.
I'd say the inducements are going up, and then everyone's trying to pass the buck on to everybody else, right? Everyone's trying to figure out, well, we want you to do more work. All the tenants want the landlords to do more work, and all the landlords want the tenants to do the work because everyone has their budget, and then everyone knows that when the budget comes back, it's always higher. When it's finished.
At the end of the day, the tenant's still paying for it. Yeah, we'll give you more TI, but the rent's got to reflect it over time. So.
We probably have time for one more question if there is one.
In my world, it's always going to be corporate covenants where that structure just wouldn't fly. Although we are seeing, for example, MTY, which is the biggest food court operator, they probably have 80 to 90% of the food courts. They're trying to start severing themselves from leases and just go on the back of the franchisee. That's like, guys, wait a minute. The whole reason we did this deal, you sold us on it, was the corporate covenant. And now, after the fact, even though your share price is up, you're trying to get off the hook and go on the back of the franchisee, and it's not flying in our world.
Yeah, I would. Landlords always want to see the covenant, but I think there's some. The one interesting thing to look at, or over the last little bit, is the covenant's important, but the operator and the concept is the most important, because even if the company has 65 locations in Canada, or the biggest, they're the biggest coffee retailer in the country, doesn't mean they're not going to close stores. So at the end of the day, you've got to really believe in the concept and believe in what's operating there. That's paramount to if they're going to survive. Covenant's important, but you've really got to look at that.
Well, that brings us to the end here, and I want to thank you all for joining us, and a particular thank you to our real experts here, Brodie, Katie, and Shane. And for all of you, I hope you have some great facts that you can share at the boardroom table or at the dinner table tonight. It's been great sharing this hour with you. Thank you.
Thanks again to our wonderful moderator, Madeleine Nicholls. That was fantastic. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. And thanks to our panelists, Shane Epp, Shane Epp of BentallGreenOak, Katie Bertram of H&M Canada, and Brodie Henrichsen of JLL Canada, who's also a Sir Somerville alumni. And if any of you are trying to reach me and it goes to voicemail, that probably means I'm at the mall and my phone is off, not being tracked. As always, thank you very much to this morning's featured sponsors. At the platinum level, we have Anthem Properties, Avis & Young, Cushman & Wakefield, Cadillac Fairview, Ani Group, and Westbuild. At the gold level, Concord Pacific, Hungerford Properties, JLL, Madison Pacific Properties, Orion Construction, and Turner Construction. And at the patron level, CDC Construction Limited, Clark Wilson LLP, Downtown Surrey Business Improvement Association, Lee & Associates, Morgard, and Wales McClelland Construction. Thanks again for everyone joining us here today, and we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday at our spring cocktail event. If you haven't registered, please check out our website. Thanks again, and have a great morning.